Good afternoon and good morning for our friends in the West Coast. Welcome to Research Impact Canada's webinar on knowledge brokering. Research Impact Canada is an international knowledge mobilization network, and the Professional Development Committee is pleased to offer this webinar for you. The webinar will also be available in the future on our website. This is being recorded. We have three of our network colleagues that are going to be presenting to us this afternoon. First, Boyan Fürst is the Manager of Knowledge Mobilization at the Harris Center at Memorial University. We have Cynthia Belaski, Research Support Facilitator within the Faculty of Social Sciences at McMaster University. And pleased to be joined by Bobby Glushko, the Associate Chief Librarian at Western University. We're going to be getting three rather unique perspectives on knowledge brokering. For our audience joining us today, please feel free to type in questions. We'll hold questions until the end, and I will moderate that part of our conversation where you can direct questions specifically to one of our speakers or to the panel overall. We're pleased we have attendees from all across the country, so thank you for making the time to join us. With that being said, I will pass things over to Boyan to kick things off. Thank you very much to the three of you.
Thank you, Michael. Do you have a secret life as a CBC announcer or something? That was very good. Hello, everybody. My name is Boyan Fürst, and thank you very much for joining us for this webinar. I have a very short presentation, about 10 minutes, and I'm going to share some of the experiences we had here at the Harris Center with knowledge brokering and knowledge mobilization, but I will really focus on knowledge brokering. As Michael said, I'm Manager of Knowledge Mobilization at the Leslie Harris Center of Regional Policy and Development at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And if there is anything that is a little bit different about us than from the rest of our colleagues across the country, is that we are very focused on the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. And we are very focused on rural and remote regions in the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. So our brokering may sometimes look a little bit different because we have to create situations where brokering between communities and faculty, staff, and students at the university actually can happen. That's not always easy. We are the only university in the province, and we are very lucky. Unlike most other places in Canada, when the university was formed in 1949, right into the university's mission, in the actual legislation that established the university, it has been written that the university, among other things, teaching, research, also has a special obligation to people of Newfoundland and Labrador. And it was left kind of at that, and we have the lovely choice of interpreting that however we want. So over the decades, that special obligation was met in different ways. The Harris Center and our brokering and knowledge mobilization activities today are certainly part of that obligation of meeting the expectations and needs of the people within the province. So you can say that knowledge brokering and knowledge mobilization was kind of baked into the DNA of the university, and we have the lovely luxury of never being questioned why we do what we do, because we are doing exactly what we are supposed to be doing. Because of kind of that long tradition that we come from, we were a little bit unsatisfied with the definitions of knowledge mobilization that are out there. So we kind of came up with our own. And part of that came from the fact that we weren't interested in doing things that our communications colleagues are already doing very well, which is research communications. We were interested in bringing together academic research-based knowledge and experiential knowledge and any kind of resource that is available to people in the province to help them solve some of the issues that they're facing. So our definition was always about knowledge exchange, because we recognize that knowledge is not something that university can dish out, that it exists in various forms all around us, and that nobody should really have monopoly on knowledge. So over the years here at the Harris Center, we have developed a variety of programs that allow for knowledge mobilization and knowledge exchange. We always consider our jobs to be that our job is to create the opportunities for various knowledge holders to meet and to work together towards solutions. So the first step in that knowledge mobilization process for us is knowledge brokering. So if knowledge, it's really for us the foundation of everything we do. And that initial step of matchmaking is really not rocket science. Sometimes it's as simple as picking up the phone and matching the right people through a phone call or an email. But it does require several things. It requires the knowledge of the province. It requires pretty deep understanding of the capacity and expertise that's available at the university, and that sometimes is not as obvious as people think it would be. And it can sometimes require a fair bit of tact and diplomacy. Knowledge brokering is something we all do regardless of our job titles in our everyday lives. I mean, we have all introduced friends and colleagues to each other to help them solve a problem they're working on. We have recommended books. We have recommended journal articles to colleagues who are working on a particular problem. What is different for us as institutional knowledge brokers is that we do it systematically and with the end goal in mind. So I like to joke that the job of a knowledge broker is to perform Jedi mind tricks on researchers, one researcher at a time. So because when knowledge brokering is done right, it kind of has to become invisible. So let me give you a couple examples. I will give you a complicated example first, and then I'll give you a rather simple one so that you kind of get an idea of the breadth of the projects that we might get involved in. So here's an actual scenario. A mayor from a small community in Outport, Newfoundland, calls the Harris Center and he says, well, we are interested in exploring what wind power could do for our community. And they really just wanted to learn more. So we passed them on to a researcher who was keenly interested in working with the community. They put together a little application. They identified a very specific problem around, this was a community that received its power from a diesel generator. The part of the problem was that if you have wind power and the wind stops blowing, you had to switch to hydrogen storage. But if you run out of storage and the wind is not blowing, you had to switch to diesel generator. And every time you switched power sources, the community would lose power. And this researcher worked with the community. They applied for an applied research fund from the Harris Center, and they made progress. The researcher tested his idea for software that allowed for seamless switching between power sources in 2 other communities. So we funded 2 more projects. And it was all going really well. The researcher applied to the Natural Sciences and Engineering Council for funding, received significant amount of funding, developed a really good prototype. Private companies stepped in, invested significant amount of money, and created this multi-million-dollar in a very remote community in southern Newfoundland. A national newspaper of record wrote a lovely story about it and about the great community academic collaboration and research breakthroughs and wonderful new technology. And you know who nobody ever mentioned? Nobody ever mentioned the guys who bought coffee and cookies for that first meeting, right? And the thing is that that's exactly the kind of outcome that we are hoping for on most of the projects that we broker. As the projects mature and develop, the participants should feel that they have always been working together because they start building this really strong relationship. And that relationship can get strong only if we step away and let them figure out how they're going to develop that relationship and where they're going to take it. We are always there, happy to help if they need help in any shape or form that we can provide, but we really step away from the projects once they kind of get off the ground. And the problem is that if we tried to kind of insert ourselves into that relationship all the time, we would weaken the partnership. And what's worse, we would make a nuisance of ourselves and nobody would ever call us again, which is not the way I would like to work myself out of my job. So let me give you another example. This one is very simple. It doesn't require multi-million-dollar projects. We organized a little meeting in a rural community in Newfoundland, Labrador. We brought a whole bunch of researchers with us. We had all kinds of people from the community. And one of the people who was there was a woman who runs a bed and breakfast on Twillingate in Northeast, just off the coast of the Northeast Newfoundland, main island of Newfoundland. And she said, on my island, we have many of these root cellars, like the one in the picture, where people would store their vegetables for the winter in the olden times. And she said, I would like to provide a interpretive walk for my guests, but I need somebody to map those cellars and record some stories. We were able to match her with a master's in public folklore student. She put them up for a couple of weeks in her bed and breakfast. Student had great time, did all the work that needed to be done. The bed and breakfast owner got her interpretive map, and Digital Archives Initiative at MUN got another piece on the heritage of the province. So everybody ended up happy. Student probably had the greatest time. So to do what we do, we really needed to develop some tools. Memorial is a mid-sized university. We have about 20,000 students, about 1,000 faculty. It's impossible to keep all that, who's doing what, in our heads. So we developed yafo.ca, which is a little online tool that houses research profiles and many projects that researchers at Memorial are working on. And it allows anybody in the community to enter a research opportunity. When somebody creates a research opportunity, Amy Jones in my office, who is a knowledge mobilization coordinator, and I get a notification. We make sure that opportunity is something we can work with. If it is, we'll try to actively broker it with researchers. If it isn't, we'll work with the person who submitted the opportunity to kind of get it into better shape. The new YAFO, which we just redeveloped and relaunched last year, is really interesting because it also visualizes engagement relationships among the researchers. So it helps with the knowledge brokering when you can see who is already working with whom on what kind of projects. So here are some of the things we learned. It helps if you set clear expectations. Try to always trust and listen to your partners. They kind of know what they're talking about, especially in small communities that they live in. We learned that experimenting is okay, and it's okay to fail occasionally. That's the only way to really learn what works and what doesn't. We always try to focus on our strengths. In our case, is our focus on the province. It's our focus on community development. It's our focus on really being there as a broker and not pretending to have the expertise that's not ours to have. Technology is your friend, use it. We managed to webcast out of the smallest communities in the province. Sometimes it requires some serious jerry-rigging technology, but you can do it. There are all sorts of ways to get a little bit of connection wherever you are. Things will always go sideways, no matter how well you plan, but it's important to plan so that you can fix it. And we also learned that there's great public demand for what we do. But it's there only because we are really careful with our integrity. We are quite happy to turn down projects that we feel are not something we can stand behind. So that's really something that's important. And it can be hard to do when you're in a fiscal situation where, a private company comes to you and says, would you facilitate a knowledge brokering session for us? And they will put some money on the table. But if that doesn't meet certain standards, we are not interested in helping somebody kind of, pull the wool over community's eyes, essentially. So that's really all I have. Just maybe to recap, knowledge mobilization for us is always about recognizing that there are different ways of knowing and that they all have value. It's about putting all that knowledge in the service of society, and knowledge brokering, that matchmaking process, is the first step in the knowledge mobilization process. The trick is to help partners just enough to get them going, and then to leave them to do their own thing. And sometimes that's a little bit easier said than done. So thank you. That's enough for me. From me. I'm happy to answer any questions, and you can always get in touch with me. And now I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that somebody can take over.
No problem. Thank you very much, Boyan. And while Cynthia queues up her slides, Boyan, I like that. You are now Yoda. You are the Yoda of the Research Impact Canada Network. A little taller, a lot more handsome. But thank you. And please understand that Memorial have been long-standing leaders in this kind of work for a long time. So for you to be able to share important aspects of your work is critical. Cynthia approaches knowledge brokering from a rather unique perspective, and I know here at York there are a number of research officers who are joined us today, and I lean pretty heavily on them in my role here. So delighted to have you be able to share important aspects of your work with us from a research facilitator standpoint. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Michael. So I'm the research support facilitator in the Faculty of Social Sciences here at McMaster University. So unlike Boyan, I do not have thousands of or 1,000 people to keep in mind. I have about 120 who are active researchers. So it's a little bit more manageable, although we do have a similar system here at McMaster that is just newly started, I guess, in the last 3 or 4 months, called McMaster Experts, that is based on the same Vivo platform as YAFL. So we'll see, I think, some interesting developments that'll happen in the next few years as those systems maybe become more connected. So one of the things that I thought of when I was when I sort of started grappling with this idea of talking about best practices for knowledge brokering is like, do I even broker, and how do I broker when everyone is already so well connected? Because in the social sciences, a lot of the faculty members who do work with community or with external stakeholders have been really doing this. This is how they've made their living. This is the research they've been doing probably since their master's degrees. And so they've got a lot of long-standing relationships. So what do they even need me for? So yes, do I even broker? So I tried to sort of think through some of the different definitions of what a knowledge broker is and what a research support facilitator is. And I think I sit somewhere between the research officers at York and a knowledge broker or a knowledge mobilization officer. So I'm often already working with people who are quite engaged in community. Very rarely I'll find somebody who's sort of knocking on my door looking for sort of flat out, I need help. I've got, I need a community partner in a particular area. It does happen sometimes where, say, somebody has been working with a particular cohort and is looking to move into, say, a different people with a different demographics or different region or that sort of thing, but it is pretty rare. One of the things I really one of the ways I describe my work a lot is that I'm a facilitator. I make hard things a little bit easier. And it's often the stuff, for some reason, I don't know if I'm just weird or what, but I like to do some of these things. I'm interested in university processes. I'm interested in granting agencies and their processes. And so I like to get my hands dirty and do that stuff that other people kind of don't want to do or they don't have time to do. And it's not necessarily a priority. One of the things that a lot of my faculty members come to me and ask when they are working with community is what to do next. What are my options? What are our options? Because they have probably been fostering a relationship for quite some time, and they just aren't entirely sure where to go next or what makes sense for the relationship. And that's where I think some of my work crosses over very much with Boyan's, in that it's really about relationship management. It's and I get to be that sort of consistent point person that they can come back to, that I'm there sort of through the entire research, through the whole from beginning to, you know, implementation to end of the research project, that I'm that person that they can come back to. They're not sort of like, oh, your grant is in, off, see you later, hope it goes well. That they, you know, that I'm someone who is there when, you know, surveys need to actually be done, and all of a sudden someone's dropped off the map, and what can we do? And, or, you know, someone was supposed to show up to do a survey at our community center today and they didn't. What's going on? They know that if they pick up the phone and call me, that I'll at least be here. I'm not going to go and do the survey. That's not where I belong. But I will try and help make some of those difficult things a little bit easier when they do go sideways. So some of the things that I do, the way that I sort of think of my role is as counselor, trainer, translator, reverse magician, and doer. So the rest of my slides are really quickly going to sort of go through these different roles, these different hats that I wear. So a lot of the work that I do is as a counselor or an advisor on research programs. So sort of looking at the big picture for researchers. How should we go about doing this? What will this research look like in 6 months? What will it look like in 6 years? Where will we be as a team? Sometimes the 6 years isn't even going to be there, and sometimes it is. And you know, we spend a lot of time sort of mapping things out and managing expectations, and really looking what's feasible both for the community and what they can provide, what kind of time and resources they can put into research, as well as for the researcher. Where can we apply for funds? This is a big question for researchers. And I think that right now, because I'm still relatively new to this role, I had previously been working with a lot of external agencies. So that was my main goal. That's one of the things I brought to the table, was knowing where to look outside of the university for money. Now I'm learning a lot about the little internal pots of money that we have to support some of these initiatives. And what I find with social scientists is that they are incredibly frugal, and many of them have managed to keep research programs going with very little money and be sort of plugging away. And just a little bit of internal money, a small internal grant, can really help take that research to the next level. And this is sort of the counselor role, listening and guiding when things don't go as planned. So really being that person who, you know, they know that they can knock on my door and I will listen. Sometimes it means, you know, drinking many cups of tea in a day as things are getting stressful, or when, you know, it takes 3 or 4 phone calls to actually get a hold to somebody and it gets frustrating, and how do we do that? Or, you know, sometimes I'm the person who has to bring up things like partner contributions to a project and talking about valuing things. And those are uncomfortable conversations. A researcher does not necessarily want to say to a, you know, community person like, well, how much is your staff time actually worth per hour? Nobody wants to have that conversation about salary. And it's something that I can do because I'm not as, you know, closely involved in the relationship as the researcher is. Another thing I do is work as a trainer. So I help build capacity and academic acumen among non-academic partners. So when somebody is working with the university, if a grassroots organization is coming on board to work with the university for the first time, what is that going to be like? How can I make that difficult process a little bit easier? How can I help facilitate this sort of these new kinds of relationships? One of the things that I hear time and again from community partners and external stakeholders is that the university is a very intimidating place. It's big. It doesn't, you know, it's not on Google Maps. You can't find anything. So what does that look like? Well, sometimes it means, you know, sending an email saying, I'll be standing at parking lot A in a white scarf. You'll know where to find me. And that really, you know, putting that friendly face, being somebody who's there and helps people through like physically or virtually through the university system, I think really helps. Another thing that I do on the flip side of that is help build capacity and good community research practice among academics. Sometimes we do have people who are deciding to, you know, try to take what they've been doing sort of in an academic setting into the community, and, you know, community members sometimes are like, again, another person, you know, here we go again, we're going to be studied again. What is that going to look like? And so, a lot of social scientists, most social scientists have great community-based research skills, and that goes without saying. But the odd time they don't, and this is something, they're taking a left turn, they want to try something different with their research, and I'm here to help them along the way. I obviously don't train people in research methods, but what I do is put them in contact with people, collaborators or co-applicants or co-investigators who maybe can help them build that capacity and make it so that the relationship, and this goes back to the relationship management point earlier, that relationship stays healthy, that relationship stays something that the community partner and the researcher feel like this is worthwhile, and this was work well done. And another thing that I do a lot, and I think probably all my colleagues can agree to this, is we attend meetings. We show up and we listen, and sometimes we don't say anything, and it's super hard for me because I like to talk a lot. But we're there, and we are listening, and we're taking notes, and we're listening with a different ear. We're thinking, I think through what this project will, how I can see this project unfolding, what funding it will make sense to apply to other potential collaborators inside or outside of the university. Another big role I think that I play, and it sort of speaks to the previous one, is as translator. I've got to move our pictures over. There we go, so I can see my slide. So I translate academic and administrative language into something meaningful for external partners. So, what do some of these research terms mean? What does external funding mean, or shirk, or what is this applying for grants? Like, some of these things can be, especially with our grassroots stakeholders, can be very intimidating, and describing it in a way that makes sense for the kind of work that they're doing really helps get the community buy-in. I also, as with Boyan's team, translate community partners' questions into research questions that make sense both to academics, because a lot of academics will go, absolutely, we have to do this, it's the right thing to do, we have to get engaged, but then they go, how are we going to fund it, Cynthia? And then that's another step in the translation process, because we've got to look at what our funders are expecting and what how can we translate, say, a needs assessment at a community organization into something that SHIRC wants to fund? What kind of language can we use? What kind of methods can we use? What should the lit review look like for that? This is my favorite one, reverse magician. And this is where, this is one of, I think, the most fun parts of my role, is making the invisible visible. Because I am somebody who's attending those meetings, and I'm seeing so much of the work that goes in on the back end, before the grant application goes in, before the research project takes hold, before the publications are done. I am in a position as an administrator to make a lot of this effort visible. So for an academic who's maybe, it seems like they haven't published in a long time. Well, I know that's because they've been at community meetings twice a month, fielding calls. I know it's because, they've been hosting potlucks and building trust in a relationship. And I'm able to sort of bring that perspective forward. And it's something that maybe people who are not specialists in the same area wouldn't necessarily see. So one of the ways that I've done that here in the Faculty of Social Sciences is made a couple of small internal awards that really are to recognize two groups who I think do a lot of invisible work. And I wanted to make it visible. So the one is for early career researchers. So, this is really for people who are just getting off the ground with their research, but who are having big impacts either in their community or in their field of practice. And it was just rolled out and announced for the first time last week, so that was really exciting. And the other is the Impact Award. Some of our researchers, they're not going to be researchers who would make sense for, say, a SHIRC Gold Medal or something like that, because they've done work that's really local. It doesn't sort of have a national scope. And I think that that's work, it's sort of a lifetime achievement work that still deserves some recognition. And so it was exciting. I was kind of nervous when those two calls went out. I thought maybe I'm the only one who gets all worked up about awards and thinks that these are really important things. But then the nominations started coming in, and so that was really heartening. That I thought, okay, no, your peers are thinking that this is important too. So it was nice to see some uptake on that. And then my predecessor, Ilse Fullwood, who many of you have probably worked with, the previous Associate Dean Research, Tony Porter, started the Community in Scholar Fellowship that recognizes work for people who are working with community partners, so that the academic researcher gets some release time and the community partner gets some release time from their work to build capacity at the community organization to do research, and 12 months to work on a research project. Another one of the things that is making the invisible visible is articulating a value in something that's often taken for granted. I think when folks are working in community, it is very easy, like, oh, this is a passion project. This is what you want to be doing. This is all volunteer work. But as we know, our passion projects, our volunteer work do not pay our mortgages. They do not help get tenure and promotion. And they are things that we should be recognizing in letters, of in-kind support and in budgets and in, how much was the actual cost of this project. And again, as I mentioned earlier, that's not always something people are super comfortable doing because it's putting a number, putting dollar numbers on things, but I think it is an important step in the process. And nobody ever wants to do budgets anyways, so I'm happy to take on some of that work. And finally, I promise this is my last one. I'm probably over time. But I'm a doer. Sometimes, as much as I really want to and enjoy building capacity, either with my researchers or with community members, sometimes it just really makes sense as the administrator to do something. It's sometimes just a lot easier for everybody involved, because my boss has given me the time to actually put towards doing this. Whereas it might be very side of desk for either the researcher, who has to stand in front of 100 students and give a lecture in 45 minutes, or a community member who has 150 other tasks to accomplish that day at their regular job. So sometimes, not just sometimes, a lot of the times it's just saying yes and doing the task. Taking on, yes, we will take care of doing your CV. Yes, we will help you open up that application. Yes, I can photocopy those surveys for you and get them in your mailbox. Another thing is to respond and be the help desk. Like, oh, Cynthia, the system's not working. I probably hear like 75 times a day. And so sometimes, it's me sending the message to the help desk again, because somebody's running off to take care of one of their other tasks. That are more sort of front of brain, and looking for creative solutions, which can be all kinds of things. Sometimes it's making unusual matches between folks who you wouldn't think would normally even be having a conversation around research. It can involve all kinds of things. Like 98% of them are even legal that we come up with, so that's really good. And just sort of getting them done for researchers. And I think, that is the end of what I do as a research support facilitator. And I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Cynthia, thank you very much. A lot of insight on a very, very important role within our member institutions, especially as it dovetails to knowledge mobilization, because as federal funding requirements have changed over the years, I know you and your colleagues, not only at McMaster, but across the country, have gotten more actively engaged in this. Thank you. We're off to Bobby Glitchko now. So here's the deal, folks. If you haven't had a chance to work with librarians, my God, make it happen, all right? These folks are smart, they're cool as hell, and they are uniquely positioned with incredible background and skills to support knowledge mobilization. I've worked with a librarian for over 10 years, and I think everyone needs to. It's just it's a movement.
So Michael, if you could just follow me around the meetings, that would be really awesome. Can you all see my slides? I'm a little afraid that things aren't working out right. I'm okay, doing well. Okay.
All good.
So I'll be quick. What I do want to talk about is just how the library can be a partner in knowledge exchange, knowledge brokering, knowledge mobilization. All right. There we go. So just quick introduction. I'm Bobby Glitchko, Associate Chief Librarian, Western University. Not with me here today is Erin Huner, the Knowledge Exchange Manager of Western University. Erin would have loved to be here, but she's currently administering a really cool project, knowledge exchange project called Learning with Head and Heart. where we're partnering First Nation students with faculty and using Indigenous research methods to help kind of get undergraduate First Nation students really into the research process. So she's doing interviews for that, and she'd love to be here, so she sends her regrets. Just a quick overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm just going to kind of lay out what we're doing here at Western with the partnership between the research office and the library, explain kind of why and how this kind of came about how this came about happening, and how we're actually making that relationship manifest material. So one of the things that Erin and I realized when we met each other was that we both had like generally positive feelings about what the other one did and what the other kind of discipline did. So as a librarian, I was familiar with the research office, and with the exception of, I guess, research ethics, which I had slightly less positive feeling about sometimes, I really liked the research office, right? But I wasn't exactly certain what they did. And 2 years ago, if you had asked me what knowledge brokering was, I would have had no idea. Erin similarly liked the library, liked librarians of the library, but she still thought we were doing a lot of like the kind of like booky stampy stuff. And where I got to kind of explain to her that there was a whole different discipline of librarianship. So basically what we did was come together to kind of define what we see as a holistic approach to research and research support. So, you know, this is like a very familiar kind of concept, this idea of the research cycle. And we kind of started to push against this, right? Because it implies a linearity to the way research happens. It implies that there's a kind of like causal relationship between steps in the research process. And this isn't really the way anyone actually conceives of their research. Instead, we started thinking about research as like a complex system, an ecosystem, multinodal, with strong and weak form connections between various parts. And out of that, we kind of identified where the library could serve a real role in the support of research mobilization, knowledge exchange, knowledge brokering. So this is like the old library. It's both the old library because it is a big fancy room filled with books, but it's also the old library at Trinity College in Dublin. And this is like a very kind of like classic understanding of what the library does. And I don't raise this to dismiss it. In fact, I raise it because one of the things about the library is that it is a very large piece of infrastructure. And that infrastructure is both physical infrastructure in the terms of its materials, its buildings, its books, but it's also a human infrastructure. And as libraries have kind of transitioned from places where physical knowledge was materially stored and people came to interact with it towards a new model of the library, which is centered around core user functions, very user-centric, very expertise-based, things have begun to change. Now, just a quick digression, I would argue that the fact that libraries are now providing things like expertise, technology, spaces is really a continuation of the library's existing mission as opposed to an abandonment of it. Back in 1850, when a lot of the research libraries really like got founded, like in history, books were rare and high value and critical to the research process. Now, in 2018, books are ubiquitous, not as high value and not as critical to the research process because they're kind of seen as almost an entitlement. Whereas things like technical infrastructure, human expertise, the capacity just to do work is what our researchers really need in a meaningful way. And so, like, you know, rather than see this as like the post-apocalyptic library, this is maybe the library that's kind of regrowing, kind of having a new look on. I just really like this picture and I try to use it anytime I can. I don't know, I just love it. But I like the idea that it has like this old and this rebirth and this knowledge. So I guess that's kind of like the what we're trying to do and the why we're trying to do it. We're trying to see the research cycle holistically, and we're doing it because we both now understand each other's mission in a way that we didn't before we built those relationships. So let me just give you a couple hows. So this is a representation of our institutional repository. I'm going to guess that your institution probably has an institutional repository or access to one. The institutional repository is a very powerful tool in terms of knowledge mobilization and knowledge brokering because it kind of solves the problem of post-grant dissemination of grant-funded materials. The library's commitment to the repository is likely a missions level commitment. I joke here that we have committed to support our IR until the heat death of the universe. And that if our IR ever goes away, you have way bigger problems than that. And you should stop studying whatever you're studying and start studying small scale agriculture because like things are really seriously over. I updated this slide. Last time I used it was last year, and it's pretty significant because that number said 18,000 papers in the collection and 3.6 million downloads. So in 1 year from the last time I used this picture, we have seen such a significant increase in the dissemination of the works that are being housed in our institutional repository. These works are indexed by Google Scholar. They're preserved. They're preserved in a significant and longitudinal manner, and we're able to have access, to all inhabited continents, hundreds of countries, and we're able to give our partners materials in ways that they are able to access them by using the repository. The second really major way that we're working together here is in research data management. This is a thing that here at Western we're taking very seriously. We see the future. We believe the tri-agencies are going to be coming out with some pretty real research data management requirements, at least with planning in the next year. So we're working together to understand each other. And this is a place where the reciprocality of our relationship is really important, because as the library, we were able to bring expertise in existing repository, expertise in things around like, how does metadata apply to these documents? How do we make data searchable, findable, reusable? And the research office was able to say, well, these are the kind of things that our real faculty need in their real lives. These are real case scenarios of products that you need to be able to support. So I have a faculty member, she's doing interviews that are video in the megabytes that need to be shared with 7 partners at 7 locations in 2 countries. What kind of tools can you build and use to facilitate that sort of sharing and that sort of preservation? And also things like understanding the kind of complications around research ethics. So librarians we don't like to delete things. It's kind of against our DNA to delete data once we've gotten it. It's very difficult for us to do that, but then understanding how ethics works, how that approval works, and so we work to build flexible systems with things like, termination dates and embargoes. But we also work with the research office to help researchers write protocols and ethics applications that do allow for like long-term storage that says this will be stored 200 years later, it will be made available, or things like that, right? To get around the traditional sense of ethics problems while at the same time enabling us to do what we do at libraries. So I talk really quickly, and I'm mindful of the time for questions, so I'm pretty good to go. So thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about libraries. Really happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Fabulous. Thank you, Bobby. And thank you, all 3 of you. Now, of course, there was so much shared this afternoon beyond just the Jedi magic and a post-apocalyptic planning. But safe to say that the scope of what we do in knowledge mobilization is extremely diverse, and I think extremely important given the diversity of stakeholders. So we will pass things over to our attendees now. If you want to type in any questions, and please let me know whether you want those forwarded to a specific panelist or not. And to reiterate, the webinar will be available on the Research Impact Canada website, which is being relaunched actually. So at the end of the month, I invite you to check out researchimpact.ca. It's going to look fancy and new, and really focusing more on what we do versus who we are. The webinar will be available probably late spring, early summer. And if you guys, for the folks in the audience, if you're more like me and your reflective capacity is such, at dinner time, I'd have a fabulous question for all 3 of you. So that's okay. I'll look to see how we can share your contact information for folks. And since we are all within the national network, we will open up that dialogue on an ongoing basis. Our first question is to all panelists. How would you connect with librarians to help with research dissemination if you are not part of a university? If anybody wants
I don't want to be presumptuous, but I might take a first stab at this one. If you're not part of a university, you may be connected to a university, or there may be a university in even your basic geographical area. One thing I'll say as a librarian is that librarians' compulsion to help people is like incredibly strong. And it's very rare that a librarian will turn you away because you're not carrying an ID card from their university. Now, there may be some limits, right, in the extent of people's capacity to help you if you're coming in off the street. But really, calling the reference desk, making an appointment, talking to a librarian, and getting into the system. A lot of libraries operate either consciously or unconsciously in like a no wrong doors mentality, which is that once you're into the library, you've come to the right place and you will get directed to the person who can help you. So what I would say is, if you want to get connected to a librarian and you're not formally with a university, find a library that's near you, even a public library that's near you, and simply start asking questions and build that relationship and see what comes of it. I can't guarantee that's going to work every time, but librarians do tend to be people who really want to help. So I would just say reach out. We really do like to help people.
And if I may add to that, because we are the only university in the province, we have some highly specialized libraries, collections, I should say. So, for example, Center for Newfoundland Studies is part of our library. Maritime Archive is part of our library. So in my role as a broker, people come to me with those kinds of questions. Our community lost X number of people in a shipwreck in 1868, who would I talk about that? And I usually refer them to librarians because, as Bobby said, they love to help people. So I totally vouch for that.
And just to jump in there, I don't know what it's like at other universities, but I know at McMaster, anybody can walk into the library right now. You don't need to swipe in to get through a turnstile. I go in all the time and look at things, and I never have my ID badge because I can't remember that kind of stuff. And people help, and you can figure stuff out. Just sort of looking around and asking the people at the front desk. And so I think it's usually a really warm environment to go into. So yeah, and I think that it's part of that universities, if you have access to a university library in sort of close proximity, just getting actually on the campus and doing it, because I know the university can be an intimidating, big, huge place, but once you're there, the actual people in it tend to be really great and helpful.
I'll chime in with a quick story as well. I know that our library is starting to work with a lot of collaborative teams with researchers here at York and community organizations off campus. One of Toronto's priority neighborhoods is working around a community-based research strategy. And part of that is developing a unique repository of community-based resource materials. And the library is a critical partner in that because of their unique skill sets and their ability to scale the repository, which Bobby was speaking of. York has something similar, I think most do across the country, and how to develop something that is a little bit more community-centric. So appreciate the question. I think there's a lot more that's happening than we may realize. And I certainly think, as Bobby's echoed, that libraries are open for business in terms of supporting this kind of work. Any other questions right now? And I invite the panelists, if you have any questions for anyone else based on what we've heard today, feel free to jump in.
I think one just came in, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And the question is, maybe I can take a stab at this one. Could you talk about the research tools, for example, YAFO successes and challenges? Happy to. Every tool is only as good as people who use it. So building YAFO was one thing. Getting people to use YAFO is a whole other thing. YAFO is incredibly useful to us. So, but we also had champions within the university who could see YAFO being useful to them as well. So we worked with those faculty and researchers who were already looking for something to start with. And once those people were in YAFO, they kind of became ambassadors to others. And then when we hit a certain level of adoption, we started to very gently start enforcing use of YAFO in some ways, because we have a suite of applied research funds. We would make it mandatory that once you are awarded funding, that you have to create a YAFO profile for the project. So we are kind of able now to keep current with the projects that we fund, that Office of Public Engagement funds. And now some of the researchers are starting to enter the projects automatically that they receive Tri-Council funding for. because it allows them to very easily map the connections with other researchers who are working on the project, so they see a value in it. And maybe just to share a funny story, when the original YAFO started, we had a department which shall remain nameless, that said, we are never going to be in YAFO. This is administrative burden that we don't need. And we said, okay. So their colleagues across the hallway in a very different department were all in YAFO. And when our recruiters were in China, what happened is potential graduate students use YAFO, and we never designed it with this in mind, used YAFO to find potential graduate supervisors. So Memorial suddenly had a leg up on quite a few other universities that were at that particular fair. So when the recruiters came back and explained how YAFO was used, the department, which is still nameless, overnight, almost 48 hours, every single researcher was in the YAFO because they saw value that we never envisioned. So if you look at the new iteration of YAFO, if you just go to yafo.ca, you'll see that we made that function explicit now. We allow people to flag themselves as a researcher looking for graduate students. So, you know, we are kind of constantly working on this, and it's not mandatory thing that every Memorial faculty and student has to participate in, but we are finding that most of them want to because it's actually proving to be valuable to them.
Thank you, Boyan. Anyone else want to chime in?
I can chime in really quickly on that because McMaster is, just like I said, rolling out our McMaster Experts tool, which is very similar to YAFL in a lot of ways, and it requires that same kind of buy-in. And where I've been really lucky in the faculty is that the leadership here is really in support of having up-to-date profiles. They're willing to put staff hours into helping faculty members update their profiles, get them ORCID IDs, that sort of thing, so that so anything that can be done by the machine is being done by the machine, and that there is that sort of human touch going in and making sure that the information in it is accurate. It is labor intensive, but like any of these systems, once one or two people in the office are familiar with it, it becomes so easy to sort of go in at the beginning of the month, see what's come in, see what's changed, and keep things up to date. And I think I probably wrongly gave myself credit for too much of the stuff that actually gets done in this office, because it's definitely not just me who's doing CVs. I have an amazing colleague who has forgotten more about all of the online systems and requirements than I'll ever know. So, and she's taken on a lot of the sort of like burden, but I don't think it's a burden because it's really interesting of keeping people's profiles up to date in those tools. And I see a question came in for me as well about articulating value that's sometimes taken for granted. One of the sort of interesting parts of my job is looking at what kinds of awards and different opportunities are available for people, like beyond just sort of typical peer-reviewed funding. And sometimes I'm lucky to be in the position of really looking at what different researchers have done and the impacts that they've had on their community. So, and then articulating that into a nomination for an award. And I think, as most people who've worked with researchers, and you say like, we're considering you for this award, just that thought that somebody's actually looked at the work that they've done and seen that value outside of a specialist in their area or outside of the particular community that they're working with is, it makes people feel good, and it makes them very proud of the work that they're doing. And because I kind of bridge, I've got one foot that's working really closely with researchers and another foot that's working very closely with administrators and faculty leadership and vice president research's office. I'm sometimes bringing to light work that would not normally, that is, I think sometimes it's taken for granted, like, well, of course, these people are in social work. Of course, they're going to be doing amazing things for children. yes, are they? But are they going to be doing it on Sunday mornings at 7 a.m. and until midnight on Friday night? And is that, let's try and find ways to recognize those things, because I think so many of the researchers in my faculty and others, are going so far above and beyond when they are doing community-based work that it's nice to be in that position to talk about it, to put it in applications, to even bring it forward at faculty meetings and that sort of thing.
Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Welcome.
So now I've got a bit of a queue of questions. We've got 2 within the chat function and 1 here from our colleague in Saskatchewan, which I'll read. One of the challenges we've encountered with our university library is community access to databases and publications due to licensing. Are there any creative ideas or suggestions on this front? Thank you, Lisa.
That's a really tricky question, and it really depends on how your university is structured. There's a couple ways that I think you can think about that. So the first thing is, does the community partner actually need access to the database itself or access to products arising out of the database? And that's an instance where a reference librarian could be really helpful to you. If you could have someone come in, ask a series of questions, or even call in, ask a series of questions, and get those materials, have the librarian do the search, interact with the database, and then they can oftentimes give you those materials as fair dealing under the educational exception in Canadian fair dealing law. So that's a good way to do that, is to have the librarian do the searching, do the work for you. If that's not an option for you, if you have a kind of a more long-term relationship with the community partner, there are various ways that you can give someone a researcher access to library resources. And this may be a question that you actually might need to go up the chain a little bit on, because they get kind of complicated, and the first order interaction may be like, no, we can't do that for you, because people tend to be very respectful of copyright and licenses. But there are kind of ways to get around it. So I think the first way I would suggest is try to get the librarian to do the search, stand in your shoes, basically, and then give you the materials, or give the partner the materials. And the second way is just kind of work your way up the kind of like library administrative chain until you maybe get to like an associate dean, raise your question, and then see if you can come up with a creative solution. Because there are ways to get around it, but it is a common problem. So you're not alone in that one.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's there's certainly a lot of complexity to that. In fact, that might even be just a separate webinar conversation around access to data and information and library roles. So thank you. We have 2 other questions within the chat function. I'll read one of them off now. Do you think that it is paramount to have a knowledge broker to connect knowledge producers and knowledge users? If so, why?
Can I take a stab at that? Okay, I think the answer is yes. Not because we do something special and amazing, because as I said, we all broker in our daily lives all the time. But I think for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it helps to have somebody whose job is to build these relationships. Then it gets done. The other reason is that, as Cynthia and Bobby pointed out, universities are large, sprawling, complicated things, and sometimes you don't know where to go. The rule of thumb we have here at the Harris Center is, when you don't know where to go, come to us and we'll help you. So your knowledge broker becomes the easy entry point into the university, because our jobs are literally to answer an email, to pick up the phone. If you know the researcher you need to connect to, by all means, go to them. Don't allow me to become a bottleneck to that relationship. But I think having a knowledge broker within an institution, maybe not even within a university, but within many public institutions especially, would be a really interesting proposition, because that person could almost serve as a navigator and relationship builder to help public connect with what are essentially public institutions.
Thank you very much, Boyan. Now, to let everybody know, it is 2 o'clock Eastern. We're well, almost 2 o'clock. I mean, we're technically through our time. We have another question. If folks need to leave, we completely understand. If our panelists need to leave, I completely understand.
I'm sorry, I actually do. Thank Thank
No.
you very much, everybody. Other panelists, I appreciate it. So see ya.
Bobby, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Take care. But I will throw out this final question, and if we have an opportunity to answer it, if not, we'll do what we can to get back in touch. Hi, are there any methods to assess the research impact through the digital platforms, or is it only useful for matchmaking? So I will assume that this may be related to YAFL.
I am not, Cynthia actually might be more familiar with digital platforms that can be used to measure research impact. YAFO is not designed to do that. It is a brokering tool and sort of a connecting tool. We struggle with assessing research impacts. And the more we work with the community, the more we struggle, because we are realizing that probably the only way to really assess impacts is through narratives and maybe long-term, looking at long-term impacts. Because whatever happens in short term, sure, we can measure it, but I'm not sure it's a terribly good measure of research impact, and especially not a terribly good measure of strength of the relationships that can develop over time. But I think that Cynthia might have a better answer than me.
I think so. I'm definitely not the expert in the McMaster Experts platform by any means, but I am somebody who's trying to use it for things like impact. And what we have seen with the way that McMaster's program has rolled out is that it's largely currently measuring your typical publications, presentations, but they do measure publications really quite broadly. So it's I think there's 36 different kinds of publications that it counts. So, so it's not just journal articles and book chapters and, books. It's other sorts of things. And of course, as somebody who's a research support facilitator in a place where we're not only doing those sorts of kinds of knowledge translation or knowledge exchange, I, of course, am always pushing them to buy more parts of the program that will allow us to represent the different kinds of things that people are doing, so that more community-based impacts can be represented. I haven't won yet, but it's early days, so we'll see if maybe it would be really lovely if a list of other kinds of impacts could be produced in the same way that you can produce a list of publications. But we're working towards it. But I think, at least from where I sit, the leadership in this faculty is very supportive of that, and they're happy to advocate for it, which is really helpful. But even too, like having a really up-to-date publication list produced really quickly is a very useful tool. Even as an administrator, to be able to pull on that, know the exact title, know the exact date, the exact page numbers right away when we're cross-referencing something quickly to get it out the door is quite helpful.
Well, thank you very much, everybody. I'll formally close things off now, but understand as one of the objectives of a day like today, it's really just to initiate dialogue across our network. So to Boyan and Cynthia and Bobby, thank you very much for your time and sharing insights around the important work you're doing. I know for a fact it's probably creating a lot of cause for reflection for folks who have participated today, and probably initiating a lot of conversations across campuses across the country. Our Professional Development Committee for Research Impact Canada will be in touch with you. For everybody that registered today, we'll be sending out a very brief evaluation over the next few days. And if you could make some time to fill that out, we'd be very grateful. We're certainly looking for insight and ideas around how to make this process better and easier for you. But this has been a lot of fun. So thank you very much. Happy spring, everybody. And take care. Enjoy the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Boyan.
Bye.